They called her the fat sister, the ugly one, the joke. And when her father shoved Lydia Marsh onto that westbound wagon in her beautiful sister's place, he laughed so hard he nearly choked. "Blood is blood," he'd wheezed, slapping the horse's flank. "Let's see if the rancher notices the difference." Now she stood in the dirt yard of the Brennan ranch, watching Colt Brennan's face turn to stone as he realized the woman climbing down wasn't the delicate beauty from the tintype photograph. His jaw worked. His eyes went cold. And Lydia Marsh understood, in that terrible moment, that she'd been sent west not as a bride, but as her father's final, cruelest punchline. But here's the thing about women the world underestimates. They learn to survive in ways that break the men who discarded them. If you want to see how a woman nobody wanted became the one choice that mattered, stay with me until the very end. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. From the dusty roads of Montana to wherever you're watching right now. The wagon's wheels had stopped turning, but Lydia Marsh's hands still shook from 3 weeks of rattling over rough roads, clinging to wooden slats, and pretending she couldn't hear the driver's muttered complaints about extra weight. She pressed those trembling hands against her skirt now, smoothing fabric that would never smooth, trying to make herself smaller, even though she'd learned years ago that smaller was something her body would never be. The Montana sky stretched overhead, impossibly wide and blue, nothing like the cramped gray mornings back in Philadelphia, where she'd spent 24 years making herself invisible in her father's house. Here, there was nowhere to hide. The ranch spread before her in all directions, raw land, rough buildings, and a big man standing perfectly still in the center of it all, staring at her like she was a mistake that had just landed in his yard. Colt Brennan. Even from 15 feet away, Lydia could see he was everything the letters had promised Ruby. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and hands that looked like they could break fence posts or build houses depending on the day's demands. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, the kind of handsome that came from work instead of mirrors. He wore dust like a second skin, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, swept over Lydia once, twice, then fixed on something past her shoulder as if looking directly at her might confirm a reality he wasn't ready to accept. "You're not Ruby Marsh." His voice came out flat, not a question but an accusation. Lydia's throat tightened. She'd practiced words for this moment during all those endless miles west, rehearsed explanations and apologies, but standing here under his stare, every prepared sentence crumbled to dust. "No, sir, I'm Lydia. Lydia Marsh, Ruby's sister." He said it like a curse. The letter said Ruby Marsh. Tintype showed Ruby Marsh. He finally looked at her directly, and Lydia felt the weight of his disappointment like a physical thing. "What the hell is this?" Behind her, the wagon driver cleared his throat. "Payments due, Mr. Brennan. I delivered a bride like contracted." "You delivered a woman," Colt said, still staring at Lydia. "Not the one I sent for." "Blood is blood. That's what her pa said when he loaded her up." The driver spit tobacco juice into the dirt. "Said you wouldn't mind the substitution, long as the name was right." Something twisted in Lydia's chest. Shame and anger braided so tight she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This was it then. The moment she'd see exactly how much her father's joke would cost her. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet Colt Brennan's eyes, even as her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. "My father," she said, and her voice only shook a little, "thought it would be funny. Ruby was supposed to come. She was your bride, the one you wrote to, the one whose picture you have. But the morning I was meant to help her pack, Father told me I was going instead. He said, 'Blood is blood,' and put me on this wagon himself. He was laughing." She swallowed hard. "He thought sending me in her place was the best joke he'd played in years." Colt's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. "And Ruby?" "Ruby is home. Probably married by now to Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son she actually loves." Lydia's fingers dug into her skirt. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Brennan. I know this isn't what you expected. I know I'm not—" She stopped, refusing to say the words out loud. "Not pretty. Not wanted. Not good enough. I can work. I'm strong. I can earn my passage back if you'll give me time." The ranch yard had gone quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of cattle. Two men had emerged from the barn, watching the scene unfold with undisguised curiosity. One of them, an older man with silver threading through his beard, caught Lydia's eye and tipped his hat, the first kind gesture she'd received since leaving Philadelphia. Colt stood there, jaw working like he was chewing through options he didn't like. Finally, he exhaled hard through his nose and turned to the wagon driver. "Your payment's in the barn office. Pick it up and get moving." "You keeping her or sending her back?" The driver's tone suggested he didn't much care either way. "That's my business." Colt's voice carried an edge that shut down any further questions. He jerked his head toward the barn, and the driver shuffled off without another word. Then Colt turned back to Lydia, and she braced herself for dismissal, for the long ride back to Philadelphia and her father's howling laughter when she arrived home unwanted twice over. Instead, Colt said, "You'll stay. For now." He said it like a man agreeing to house a stray dog until he could figure out where else to dump it. "I paid for a bride. And I'm not eating the cost of your father's joke. You'll work, you'll stay out of my way, and we'll figure the rest out later." Lydia blinked, thrown off balance. "You want me to stay?" "I want my money's worth," he corrected coldly. "Nothing more. You can take the upstairs room at the end of the hall. It's empty. Supper's at 6, breakfast at 5. If you can't work, you can't eat. Understood?" It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even kindness. But it was a roof and a chance, which was more than she'd had 3 weeks ago sitting in her father's house, listening to him explain how he'd played the best trick of his miserable life. "Understood," Lydia whispered. Colt nodded once, sharp and final, then turned toward the barn without another word. The older ranch hand who'd tipped his hat earlier approached with Lydia's small trunk. Up close, she could see laugh lines around his eyes and a gentleness in his weathered face that made her throat tight. "Name's Henry Walsh, miss. I help run this place." He set her trunk down carefully. "Don't mind Colt none. He's a hard man, but he's fair. You show willing, he'll come around." "Thank you, Mr. Walsh." Lydia managed a small smile. "I appreciate the kindness." "Just Henry, miss." He gestured toward the house, a 2-story structure that had probably been handsome once, but now wore its age and peeling paint and sagging shutters. "Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying. Fair warning, it ain't fancy. Colt's a rancher, not a decorator." That pulled a surprised laugh from Lydia, short and slightly hysterical. "I wasn't expecting fancy, Henry. I was expecting to be sent straight back home." "Well, that's something then." Henry picked up her trunk again. "For what it's worth, your pa sounds like a real piece of work. Man who'd send his daughter west as a joke ain't worth the boot leather it'd take to kick him." Lydia followed Henry toward the house, casting one last look at the barn where Colt Brennan had disappeared. Through the open doors, she could see his silhouette against the light, shoulders rigid, hands braced against a workbench like he was holding himself up through sheer will. She'd seen that posture before, in mirrors, after her father's particularly cutting remarks, when she'd locked herself in her room and tried to breathe through shame. It was the stance of someone who'd had their expectations shattered and was trying to figure out what to do with the pieces. The inside of the house matched Henry's warning. Clean enough, but sparse and cold, like nobody had ever tried to make it a home. The furniture was functional, the walls bare, the whole place echoing with the kind of loneliness that came from years of one man living alone with his disappointments. Henry led her up a narrow staircase to a hallway lined with closed doors. "This one's yours." He pushed open the last door on the left, revealing a small room with an iron-frame bed, a battered dresser, and a window that looked out over empty prairie. "It ain't much, but the roof don't leak and the mattress is decent. Used to be the previous owner's daughter's room, before she got married and moved to Denver." Lydia stepped inside, setting her small bag on the bed. The room smelled like dust and disuse, but it was hers, at least for now. "It's perfect, Henry. Thank you." He lingered in the doorway, shifting his weight like he wanted to say something more. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, miss, I've been working for Colt 6 years now. He's a good man, but he's been alone a long time. Built this place up from nothing after his father drank away the family land back in Texas. He don't trust easy, and he don't like being made a fool of." "I didn't mean to—" "I know you didn't." Henry's voice was gentle. "But he wrote to that bride agency 3 months ago, sent money, made plans. In his head, he'd already decided how things would be. Then you show up instead, and all those plans went up in smoke. He's angry, but I don't think he's angry at you. He just don't know where else to put it yet." Lydia sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "What do I do, Henry? How do I make this work when he looks at me like I'm a punishment he has to endure?" "You do exactly what you said you'd do. You work." Henry met her eyes steadily. Colt respects work more than anything else in this world. You show up, you pull your weight, you don't complain, and eventually he'll see you instead of the joke your pa played. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but it's the only way forward I can see. After Henry left, Lydia sat alone in that bare room and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. She cried for Ruby's betrayal. Her sister had known, had said nothing while father made his plans, had probably laughed too. She cried for the girlhood she'd spent trying to earn love from people who'd decided she wasn't worth it. She cried for the loneliness of the past 3 weeks and the loneliness stretching ahead. But she only allowed herself 10 minutes. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and looked at herself in the small mirror hanging above the dresser. The woman looking back wasn't beautiful. Her face was too round, her body too soft, her hair too plain. She was everything Philadelphia had told her was wrong, too much and never enough, all at once. But she'd survived 24 years of being the wrong daughter in the wrong body. She'd survived her father's cruelty and Ruby's casual dismissal. She'd survived 3 weeks on a wagon that creaked under her weight while the driver made pointed comments about broken axles. She could survive Colt Brennan's disappointment too, and maybe, just maybe, she could turn, for now, into something more. Supper that first night was a silent, awkward affair. Colt sat at the head of the scarred wooden table, methodically working through a plate of beans and salt pork like it was a chore to complete rather than a meal to enjoy. Henry and 2 other ranch hands, Jake, a lanky young man with kind eyes, and Dawson, a grizzled cowboy who looked like he'd been born in a saddle, filled out the table. They ate with the efficient hunger of men who worked hard for their food. Lydia had come downstairs exactly at 6, wearing her plainest dress and her most determined expression. She'd found the kitchen empty except for Henry, who'd pointed her toward the table and told her Colt didn't hold with women cooking if there were men around to do it. He cooks for the hands, and the hands cook for him. That's how it's always been. Now she sat in the one empty chair, acutely aware of how the wood creaked under her, how her body took up more space than Ruby's would have. She forced herself to take small portions, even though the ride west had left her hollow with hunger. Better to take less than to confirm what they all surely thought, that she was the fat sister who ate too much. "Pass the bread." Colt's voice broke the silence, though he directed the request to Dawson, not to Lydia even though she sat closer to the basket. She took the hint. She was invisible until she proved otherwise. "Weather's turning," Henry said, clearly trying to ease the tension. "Saw clouds building west. Could be rain by morning." "Storm season's early this year." Colt's tone was clipped. "We'll need to check the fence line on the north pasture before it hits. Wood rot's been eating at those posts all winter." "I can ride out at first light," Dawson offered. "Take Jake with you. I want it done right." Colt pushed his plate away, barely half finished. His eyes flicked to Lydia, quick and assessing, then away again. "The chickens need feeding at dawn. Coop's behind the house. Henry will show you." It took Lydia a moment to realize he was speaking to her. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good." He stood, chair scraping against the floor. "I've got paperwork. Don't wait up." And just like that, he was gone, boots heavy on the stairs, leaving Lydia sitting with 3 ranch hands who suddenly seemed very interested in their plates. Jake broke first, offering her a sympathetic smile. "He'll thaw out eventually, miss. Just give him time." "Or don't," Dawson muttered into his coffee. "Man's got a right to be sore about being swindled." "Dawson," Henry's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking. She ain't the bride he ordered. That's a fact, not an insult." Lydia set down her fork carefully, meeting Dawson's weathered gaze. "You're right. I'm not the bride he ordered. I'm the daughter my father sent as a joke because he thought it would be funny to humiliate me one last time before I left his house. I didn't ask to be here, Mr. Dawson, but I am here, and Mr. Brennan said I could stay if I worked, so that's what I intend to do." The kitchen went quiet. Then Jake let out a low whistle. Well, damn. Even Dawson looked slightly abashed. He cleared his throat, nodded once, and went back to his coffee without another word. Henry caught Lydia's eye and gave her the smallest smile. She'd passed some kind of test, she realized. Not with Colt, not yet, but with the men who worked his land. It was a start. The next morning arrived with the kind of darkness that made Lydia question whether dawn was a real thing or just a pleasant lie people told. She dragged herself from bed at what she guessed was 4:30, dressed by candlelight, and made her way downstairs where she found Henry already in the kitchen, coaxing the stove to life. "Morning, miss." He looked her over, taking in her practical dress and sturdy boots. "You're up early. You said the chickens needed feeding at dawn. I wanted to be ready." Something warm flickered in Henry's expression. "Colt's already out in the barn. Been there since 4, I'd wager. Man don't sleep much." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, pressing one into her hands. "Drink this, then I'll show you the coop. Fair warning, them chickens are mean." He wasn't exaggerating. The hens went after Lydia like she'd personally insulted their ancestors, pecking at her hands and squawking indignantly as she scattered feed. But she got the job done, collected the eggs without breaking a single one, and made it back to the house just as true dawn started painting the sky pink and gold. Colt emerged from the barn as she crossed the yard, his shirt already dark with sweat despite the early hour. He stopped when he saw her, taking in the basket of eggs, the chicken feathers stuck to her skirt, and the scratch on her wrist where a particularly aggressive hen had drawn blood. "They get you?" He didn't sound sympathetic, just factual. "A little." Lydia shifted the basket to her other hip. "But I got the eggs." He grunted, which might have been approval or might have been indigestion. It was impossible to tell. "Henry show you around yet?" "Just the chickens so far." "Good. After breakfast you'll help him with the garden. We've got vegetables coming in that need harvesting and weeds that'll choke them out if someone doesn't get on it." He started to walk past her, then paused. "You know anything about horses?" Lydia's heart kicked against her ribs. She'd loved horses as a girl, had begged her father for riding lessons until he'd finally paid for them just to shut her up. Then Ruby had complained that Lydia looked ridiculous on horseback, all bouncing weight and graceless limbs, and father had canceled the lessons with a laugh. But she remembered. God, she remembered the feel of a horse beneath her, the joy of movement and freedom. "I know some," she said carefully. "I had lessons when I was younger." Colt's expression didn't change, but she thought she saw something shift in his eyes. "We've got a stallion that needs working. He's green broke but mean. Nobody here can settle him worth a damn. If you've got actual skill, I could use it. If you're just going to get yourself killed, stay away from the barn." It was the first time he'd suggested she might be capable of something beyond chores. Lydia clutched the egg basket tighter. "I'd like to try if you'll let me." "We'll see." He brushed past her, heading for the house. "Breakfast in 10 minutes. Don't be late." Lydia stood in the yard watching him go and felt the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. Hope. The days that followed fell into a brutal rhythm. Lydia woke before dawn, fed the chickens, helped Henry with whatever needed doing, and fell into bed each night so exhausted she barely managed to pull off her boots. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Philadelphia, hauling water from the well, weeding the vegetable garden under a sun that showed no mercy, mending fences that cut her hands even through gloves. Colt watched her the way a man might watch a horse he expected to go lame any minute. He gave her the hardest jobs, the ones that made the ranch hands exchange skeptical glances. He put her in the garden when the sun was highest and the ground was hardest. He had her haul buckets of water that sloshed and spilled, leaving her dress soaked and her arms screaming. She bled. God, she bled. From blisters on her hands, from scratches on her arms, from sunburn on her neck and nose. Her body, soft from years of sitting in parlors and pretending to be interested in needlework, protested every new demand. Some mornings she could barely stand, muscles screaming from the previous day's labor. But she showed up. Every single morning, she showed up. The ranch hands started betting on when she'd quit. Lydia heard them talking one evening when they thought she couldn't hear, Dawson giving her 3 days, Jake arguing for a week. Only Henry refused to bet, saying quietly that they were all underestimating her. She proved him right. A week became 2. 2 became 3. The blisters on her hands turned to calluses. The sunburn faded to tan. Her body, used to the soft life of a Philadelphia parlor, began to remember what it was built for. Not decoration, but survival. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ranch hand's attitude changed. Dawson stopped making pointed comments about her weight. Jake started teaching her how to properly muck stalls so her back wouldn't give out. Even Colt, though he still barely spoke to her, stopped giving her quite so many impossible tasks. But it was the stallion that changed everything. His name was Thunder. Original, Lydia thought wryly when Henry first introduced them. And he was the most beautiful, most furious creature she'd ever seen. Black as midnight with white socks and a blaze like lightning down his face. He moved like violence contained, all power and rage with nowhere to go. Colt bought him off a horse trader 6 months ago, Henry explained, keeping a careful distance from the paddock where Thunder paced. Paid too much because he saw potential. But the damn horse won't let anyone on him for more than 8 seconds without trying to kill them. Threw Jake so hard last month he broke 2 ribs. Colt's about ready to sell him for dog meat. Lydia watched Thunder move, saw the intelligence in his rolling eyes, the fear beneath the fury. She'd been that kind of angry once, the kind that came from being handled wrong for so long you forgot what gentle felt like. "Can I try?" The words came out before she could think better of them. Henry's eyebrows shot up. "Miss Lydia, I don't think—" "Please." She turned to him, desperate in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I know horses, or I used to. Let me try." Henry looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "It's your funeral, but if Colt asks, I'm telling him you insisted." "Fair enough?" Thunder watched her approach with ears pinned back, every line of his body screaming threat. Lydia stopped at the fence, not entering his space yet, just standing there, waiting. "Hey there, beautiful," she said softly. "I know. Everyone's been trying to break you, haven't they? Trying to make you into something you're not. I know how that feels." The horse snorted, tossing his head, but his ears swiveled forward, listening. "I'm not going to hurt you," Lydia continued, keeping her voice low and steady. "And I'm not going to try to break you. I just want to see if maybe we can be friends. 2 broken things, trying to figure out how to be whole." She spent the next hour just talking to him, not moving closer, not demanding anything, just being present and patient and calm. When she finally climbed back through the fence, Henry was staring at her like she'd performed a miracle. "He didn't charge you." "No." Lydia brushed dirt from her skirt. "He didn't." "Miss Lydia, in 6 months that horse has charged every person who's come near that paddock. Every single one. But he just stood there and listened to you." She smiled, something warm blooming in her chest. Maybe he was just tired of people yelling at him. That night at supper, Henry told Colt what happened. Lydia felt her face heat as all eyes turned to her, but she kept her gaze on her plate, refusing to seem like she was asking for praise. "That true?" Colt's voice was carefully neutral. "You spent an hour with Thunder and he didn't try to kill you?" "Yes, sir. But I didn't try to ride him or anything. I just talked to him." "Talked to him." Colt sounded skeptical. "A half-wild stallion, and you talked to him?" Lydia finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "My father had a lot of experience breaking things that didn't want to be broken, Mr. Brennan. I learned early that sometimes what looks like meanness is just fear wearing a different face. Thunder's scared. Someone hurt him, and now he hurts back before anyone can hurt him again. I know something about that." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Jake's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Dawson's coffee cup hung suspended in midair. Even Henry looked stunned. Colt stared at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd arrived. His gray eyes swept over her face, her work-worn hands, the way she held herself, straight-backed and proud despite everything his ranch and his disappointment had thrown at her. "You think you can gentle him?" he asked finally. "I'd like to try." "If he kills you, that's on you." "Understood." Something flickered in Colt's expression. Respect maybe, or at least the beginning of it. "Fine. You've got 2 weeks. If you can get close enough to halter him in that time, I'll give you full access to work with him proper. If you can't," he shrugged, "then we sell him and you stick to chickens." "Deal." Lydia extended her hand across the table before she could second-guess herself. Colt looked at her hand for a long moment. Small, scarred from work, steady, despite the audacious challenge she'd just accepted. Then he reached out and shook it once, firm and brief. His hand was rough and warm, and the contact sent something electric racing up Lydia's arm. From the way Colt's eyes widened slightly, he felt it too. He pulled back quickly, standing from the table. 2 weeks, he repeated, then disappeared into his office without another word. Jake let out a breath. Well, damn. Did we just witness Colt Brennan almost smile? Don't be ridiculous, Dawson muttered. But even he looked thoughtful as he watched Lydia, like he was recalculating something fundamental about who she was and what she was capable of. Lydia excused herself early that night, climbing the stairs to her small room with muscles that ached and a heart that raced. She just made a promise she had no guarantee she could keep, but as she lay in bed watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling, she thought about Thunder's scared eyes and Colt's careful assessment and the feel of his hand in hers. Maybe, just maybe, she was figuring out how to survive this place. And maybe, God, maybe, survival was just the beginning. The 2 weeks that followed were the hardest and most hopeful of Lydia's life. Every spare moment she had, she spent at Thunder's paddock. She brought him apples from the root cellar and carrots from the garden. She sang to him, silly songs from her childhood that her mother had taught her before she died, when Lydia was still young enough to believe love was something she deserved. She told him stories about Philadelphia, about Ruby and her father, about the long wagon ride west and the moment she'd realized nobody was coming to save her. Thunder listened. More than that, he responded. The first time he walked toward her instead of away, Lydia's hand shook so hard she nearly dropped the apple she was holding, but she stayed still, breathed steady, and let him come to her in his own time. That's it, beautiful, she whispered as his soft nose bumped against her palm. See? Not all hands are meant to hurt you. By the end of the first week, Thunder would walk right up to the fence when she approached. By the middle of the second week, she was inside the paddock with him, running her hands down his neck while he stood perfectly still, ears forward, eyes soft. The ranch hands gathered to watch like she was performing a miracle. Even Colt started finding excuses to be near the paddock during her sessions, though he never said a word, just stood with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. On the 13th day, Lydia slipped a halter over Thunder's head for the first time. He tensed, muscles bunching, ready to explode. But Lydia kept her hand on his neck, kept her voice low and soothing, and after a long, trembling moment, Thunder relaxed. Good boy, Lydia breathed, tears pricking her eyes. Such a good, brave boy. I'll be damned, Henry's voice carried from the fence. She actually did it. Lydia turned to find not just Henry, but Jake, Dawson, and Colt all watching her. Colt's expression was still carefully blank, but something burned in his eyes that made her breath catch. 2 weeks isn't up yet, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But I got the halter on him. So you did. Colt climbed through the fence, moving slow and careful, keeping his body language non-threatening. Thunder's ears flicked back, but he didn't bolt, didn't charge. Just watched Colt approach with wary eyes. Colt stopped a few feet away, studying the horse with an expert's eye. Then he looked at Lydia, really looked at her, the way he hadn't since she'd first arrived. You've got a gift with horses. It was the first compliment he'd given her. Lydia felt it settle into her chest like warmth after cold. Thank you, sir. Stop calling me sir. Makes me feel ancient. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. You can keep working with Thunder. Full access, like I said. Maybe you can do what none of us could and turn him into a decent saddle horse. I'd like that. They stood there, the three of them, woman, man, and horse, in the fading afternoon light. Dust motes danced in the air. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. And for the first time since arriving at the Brennan Ranch, Lydia felt like she might actually belong here. Then Colt cleared his throat and stepped back. Storm's coming in tonight. Big one, from the look of those clouds. We'll need all hands to secure the barn and get the cattle into the near pastures. That includes you, if you're up for it. I'm up for it. Good. He turned to go, then paused. And Lydia? That thing you said about your father knowing how to break things. I'm sorry that happened to you. No child should learn that lesson. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding back toward the barn with his shoulders set and his jaw tight, like he'd said more than he intended and needed to get away from it. Lydia stood in Thunder's paddock, one hand still on the stallion's neck, and felt something shift inside her. Colt Brennan was starting to see her. Not as Ruby's replacement or as a cruel joke, but as herself. Lydia, the woman who survived, who worked, who could gentle wild things. The storm hit just after sunset, rolling in like God's own fury. Wind tore across the prairie, rattling buildings and sending dust devils spiraling into the darkening sky. Rain followed in sheets, cold and violent, turning the ranch yard into a mud pit within minutes. Lydia worked alongside the men, hauling tools into the barn, checking stall doors, wrestling with shutters that threatened to tear loose. Her dress was soaked through within seconds, plastered to her body in ways that would have mortified her a month ago. Now she just ignored it, focused on the work, on making sure everything that could blow away was tied down or put away. "Lydia!" Colt's voice cut through the wind. She turned to see him sprinting toward the north barn, where the big doors were swinging wildly, threatening to rip from their hinges. "Help me get these secured!" She ran to him, sliding in the mud, catching herself, running harder. Together they grabbed the doors, throwing their combined weight against the wind. The wood fought them, bucking and shaking, and for a terrible moment Lydia thought they'd lose it. But then Colt's shoulder was against hers, his strength adding to hers, and slowly, painfully, they forced the doors closed. "The bar!" Colt shouted over the storm. Lydia grabbed the heavy wooden bar and helped him drop it into place, sealing the doors shut. They stood there, both of them heaving for breath, drenched and muddy and victorious. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Colt's face in sharp relief. In that flash, Lydia saw something in his expression that stole her breath. Not disappointment, not frustration, but something warmer. Something like admiration. "You didn't have to help," he said, rain streaming down his face. "You could have stayed in the house where it's safe." "So could you." Lydia pushed wet hair out of her eyes. "But you didn't. This is your ranch. You protect it, and right now it's mine too, so I protect it with you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Colt stared at her, and Lydia stared back, and the storm raged around them like the world was ending, but neither of them moved. Then a crash from the direction of the cattle pens broke the moment. Colt swore and took off running, and Lydia followed, because that's what she did now. She showed up. She helped. She stood in the storm and refused to break. They worked through the night, all of them, the whole ranch coming together to save what they'd built. By the time the storm finally blew itself out near dawn, Lydia was so exhausted she could barely stand. Her hands were bleeding again. Her body was one giant bruise, and she was pretty sure she'd lost a boot somewhere in the mud. But they'd saved everything. The barn stood solid, the cattle were safe, and not a single fence had been lost. As the ranch hands stumbled toward the house for coffee and dry clothes, Colt caught Lydia's arm. She turned, swaying slightly with exhaustion, and found him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You stood in the storm," he said quietly. "You didn't run, didn't hide, didn't quit. You just stood." "So did you?" Lydia's voice came out rough. "Someone had to." "Most women would have stayed inside." "I'm not most women." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I'm the fat sister, remember? The ugly one, the joke. I've been standing in storms my whole life, Mr. Brennan. This one just happened to have rain." Something fierce flashed in Colt's eyes. "You're not—" He stopped, jaw working, like the words were stuck. "Get inside, get warm. You did good work tonight." It wasn't a declaration or a poetry, but coming from Colt Brennan, it felt like both. Lydia made it to her room, peeled off her soaked clothes, and fell into bed without even braiding her hair. As sleep pulled her under, her last thought was of Colt's face in the lightning, looking at her like she was someone worth seeing. And for the first time since arriving at the Brennan Ranch, Lydia Marsh let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, for now, was turning into something more permanent. Something that might even look like home. The morning after the storm dawned clear and merciless, sunlight pouring through Lydia's window like an accusation. Every muscle in her body screamed protest as she dragged herself from bed, but she forced her feet to the floor anyway. 5 o'clock came whether you were ready for it or not, and the chickens didn't care that she'd spent half the night wrestling barn doors in a hurricane. She limped downstairs to find the kitchen already warm, the smell of coffee cutting through her exhaustion like a lifeline. Henry stood at the stove, looking as rough as she felt, dark circles under his eyes and mud still caked on his boots. "Morning, miss." He poured her coffee without asking, and Lydia could have kissed him for it. "Hell of a night." "Hell of a night," she agreed, wrapping her battered hands around the cup. The heat stung her raw palms, but the pain felt distant, muffled by the deeper ache in her bones. "Colt's already out checking fence lines. Wants to make sure nothing gave way that we missed in the dark." Henry cracked eggs into a pan, his movements efficient despite his obvious fatigue. "Said to let you sleep if you needed it." Lydia's heart did a strange little flip at that. "I'm fine. What needs doing?" Henry shot her a look over his shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "You can barely stand, miss. Nobody would fault you for taking the morning slow." "The chickens would." She managed a small smile. "And I'd fault myself. I said I'd pull my weight, Henry. Storm or no storm, that promise stands." Something warm flickered in the older man's weathered face. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" "Stubborn's just another word for survival, where I come from." She fed the chickens, who were just as mean as ever, apparently unbothered by the previous night's drama, and was hauling water from the well when Colt rode back in, his horse mud-splattered and blowing hard. He swung down from the saddle with the easy grace of a man who'd been born on horseback, then stopped short when he saw Lydia struggling with the heavy bucket. For a moment she thought he might offer to help. Instead, he just watched her, his expression unreadable in the harsh morning light. She gritted her teeth and kept pulling, refusing to show weakness, refusing to prove she was the delicate burden he'd expected when she first arrived. "North fence is down," he said finally. 30 yards at least. We'll need to ride out and rebuild it before the cattle find the gap." "I can help." The words came out breathless from exertion, but firm. Colt's jaw tightened. "It's rough work, Lydia. Heavy posts, barbed wire. You'd be better use here helping Henry with—" "I can help," she repeated, setting down the bucket and meeting his eyes directly. "Unless you're saying you don't want my help." The air between them went taut as fence wire. Behind Colt, his horse shifted and snorted, but neither of them moved. It was a test, Lydia realized, not of her strength, but of his willingness to see her as something more than the unwanted bride he'd been stuck with. "Fine," Colt's voice came out rough. "But if you slow us down, you're riding back. I won't have you getting hurt trying to prove a point." "I'm not trying to prove a point, Mr. Brennan. I'm trying to fix a fence." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone so fast she almost missed it. "It's Colt. If you're going to work my land and stand in my storms, you can use my name." Her breath caught. It was such a small thing, a name instead of a title, but it felt enormous. "Colt," she said, testing it out. "I'll get my gloves." An hour later, Lydia found herself on horseback for the first time in years, following Colt and Jake across open prairie toward the damaged fence line. The horse beneath her was a gentle mare named Daisy, old enough to forgive mistakes and calm enough not to spook at Lydia's rusty riding. Still, her thighs burned from the unfamiliar stretch, and she knew she'd be even more battered by day's end. But God, it felt good. The wind in her face, the rhythm of hoofbeats, the vast Montana sky opening up overhead, this was freedom in a way Philadelphia's cramped streets had never been. This was possibility. "You sit a horse well," Colt said, pulling his mount alongside hers. It was the first time he'd voluntarily ridden next to her, the first time he'd initiated conversation that wasn't about work orders or meal schedules. "Henry mentioned you had lessons as a girl." "Until my father decided they were a waste of money on someone who'd never make a proper horsewoman anyway." Lydia kept her eyes on the horizon, not trusting herself to look at him. "He said I looked ridiculous." Ruby agreed, so the lesson stopped. Colt was quiet for a long moment, just the creak of leather and the steady plod of hooves. Then, "Your father was wrong." 2 words, simple and direct. But they hit Lydia like a physical blow, unexpected and devastating in their kindness. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears, horrified by her own reaction. "Thank you," she managed. I'm just stating fact. Colt's tone was matter of fact, but when she finally dared to glance at him, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. You handle Daisy like you've been riding all your life. And what you did with Thunder, that takes real skill, not just luck. Your father was a fool to waste that. My father was a fool about a lot of things. The words slipped out before Lydia could stop them, bitter and raw. He thought love was a commodity you earned through performance. Be pretty enough, be small enough, be quiet enough, and maybe he'd give you scraps of affection. Ruby figured out how to play that game. I never did. Good. Colt's voice was fierce enough to make her look at him again. That's a game nobody should have to play. Before Lydia could respond, Jake called out from ahead, pointing to where the fence line had indeed collapsed. Posts snapped like kindling and wire tangled in ugly knots. They spent the next 6 hours in brutal labor, digging new post holes in ground still sodden from the storm, hauling replacement posts that seemed to weigh as much as small horses, stretching barbed wire that bit through gloves when you weren't careful. Lydia worked until her hands bled through the leather, until her back felt like it might snap, until the world narrowed to the next post, the next hole, the next length of wire. She refused water breaks when the men took them, terrified that if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to start again. Jake tried to take over for her twice, and both times she waved him off with a stubbornness that made him shake his head and mutter something about Brennan meeting his match. It was Colt who finally made her stop. He caught her wrist as she reached for another post, his grip firm but careful, and when she tried to pull away, he held on. Enough, he said quietly. Lydia, enough. You've done more than your share. The fence isn't finished. The fence will keep for 5 minutes while you drink water and rest. His gray eyes were serious, concerned in a way that made her throat tight. You're bleeding again. Let me see your hands. They're fine. Let me see them. It wasn't a request. Slowly, Lydia peeled off her gloves, revealing palms scraped raw and bleeding, blisters torn open, fingernails caked with dirt and blood. They looked like they belonged to someone else, someone who'd fought a war instead of rebuilt a fence. Colt's jaw went tight. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and poured water over her hands, his touch surprisingly gentle as he cleaned away the worst of the dirt. From his saddlebag, he produced clean cloth and began wrapping her palms with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of years tending his own injuries. You should have said something, he said, his voice low and rough. Should have stopped before it got this bad. I've had worse. Lydia watched him work, acutely aware of his calloused fingers against her skin, the way he handled her hands like they were something precious instead of ruined. My father once made me kneel on dried peas for 2 hours because I talked back to Ruby at dinner. These are just blisters. Colt's hand stilled. When he looked up at her, something blazed in his eyes that made her breath catch. Anger, but not at her, never at her. What kind of man? He stopped, visibly controlling himself. You deserve better than that. You deserved better than all of it. Maybe, Lydia's voice came out barely above a whisper. But this is what I got, so I learned to survive it. You're not just surviving anymore. Colt finished tying off the bandages, but he didn't let go of her hands. You're here. You're standing. You're building something instead of enduring something. There's a difference. Is there? She searched his face, looking for answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Because some days it still feels like endurance, Colt, like I'm waiting for you to decide I'm not worth the trouble and send me back. I'm not sending you back. The words came out fierce and immediate. I should have said that before now, made it clear. You're not for now anymore, Lydia. You're staying, if that's what you want. The prairie seemed to hold its breath around them. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. The wind rustled through the grass, and Lydia Marsh felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her whole world tilting toward something new. That's what I want, she said. Colt's thumb brushed over her knuckles, just once, so brief it might have been accidental. Good. That's good. Hey, Colt, Jake's voice shattered the moment. We've got a problem with this corner post. Wood's rotted clear through. Colt released her hands and stepped back, and Lydia felt the loss of his warmth like a physical thing. But when he looked at her one more time before heading to help Jake, his expression held something that might have been promise. They finished the fence as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride out, all three of them bone-tired and sun-worn. But Lydia felt something settle in her chest that hadn't been there before. Certainty, maybe, or hope wearing a more solid shape. At the barn, she slid off Daisy with a groan she couldn't suppress. Her legs nearly buckled when they hit the ground, and she had to grab the saddle to stay upright. Easy. Colt was there suddenly, his hand at her elbow, steadying her. Take your time. You've earned a slow dismount. I'm fine, Lydia said automatically, then caught herself. Actually, no, I'm exhausted and everything hurts and I might not be able to walk tomorrow. But I'm also proud of what we did today, so I'm fine and not fine all at once. That pulled an actual smile from Colt, small and fleeting, but real. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months. Come on, Henry will have supper ready, and you need to eat before you fall over. He kept his hand on her elbow as they walked to the house, and Lydia let him, too tired to pretend she didn't need the support. Inside, the kitchen smelled like heaven, Henry's beef stew and fresh bread, the kind of meal that could bring the dead back to life. Jake and Dawson were already at the table, and they both looked up as Colt guided Lydia to a chair. Fence is done, Colt announced, finally releasing her arm. 30 yards of new line, solid as it's ever been. We've got Lydia to thank for half of it. Dawson's eyebrows shot up. She stayed out there the whole time? The whole time, Jake confirmed. Worked like a mule and didn't complain once, even when her hands were bleeding through the gloves. Jesus, miss. Dawson looked at her with something approaching respect. You trying to kill yourself to prove a point? I'm trying to earn my place, Lydia said quietly. There's a difference. Your place is earned. Henry set a bowl of stew in front of her, the steam rising in fragrant curls. Nobody who works like you work today needs to prove anything to anyone. Henry's right. Colt took his seat at the head of the table, but his eyes stayed on Lydia. You've more than earned your keep, Lydia. You don't have to break yourself to stay here. But she did, didn't she? The thought whispered through her mind even as she smiled and thanked them. Because the moment she stopped working, the moment she let herself believe she was wanted instead of merely tolerated, that's when they'd see her clearly, see the fat girl, the ugly sister, the joke her father had played. Work was the only currency she had that held value. As if reading her thoughts, Colt's expression shifted to something that looked almost sad. But he didn't push, just started eating his stew, and the conversation moved on to cattle prices and weather predictions, and all the mundane concerns that filled a rancher's life. Later, after she'd soaked her aching body in a lukewarm bath and wrapped herself in her nightgown, Lydia stood at her window looking out over the darkened ranch. Somewhere out there was the fence line they'd rebuilt today, holding strong against the prairie night. Somewhere out there was Thunder, probably dozing in his paddock, safer and calmer than he'd been in months. And somewhere downstairs, Colt Brennan was still awake. She could see the lamplight in his office window, could picture him hunched over paperwork, managing the 1,000 details that kept this place running. She pressed her bandaged palm against the cool glass and made herself a new promise. She wouldn't just survive here. She wouldn't just work herself to dust trying to prove she deserved space in the world. She'd find a way to believe what Colt had said, that she was staying, that her place was earned, that she was building something instead of enduring something, even if that belief came slowly, even if it hurt like her blistered hands and aching back, even if she had to learn it one fence post at a time. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and weather and small, startling moments of connection. Lydia continued working with Thunder, and the stallion responded to her like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone who understood. She got him saddled for the first time, and then, in a moment that made her hands shake with triumph and terror, she swung herself onto his back. Thunder tensed beneath her, every muscle coiled tight, and for a heartbeat Lydia thought she'd pushed too far. Then the stallion let out a long breath and stood perfectly still, ears swiveling back to listen to her voice. "Good boy," she whispered, running her hand down his neck. "Such a brave, good boy." From the fence line, she heard a low whistle. Colt stood there, hat in his hand, staring at her like she'd just walked on water. "How long you been watching?" Lydia called, trying to keep her voice casual even though her heart was racing.
Long enough to know you just did something I couldn't do in 6 months. He climbed through the fence, approaching slowly.
That horse tried to kill me twice, Lydia. Threw Jake so hard he couldn't breathe for a minute. But he's standing there with you on his back like you're old friends. We understand each other. Lydia shifted her weight slightly, and Thunder responded by taking a careful step forward. He needed someone who wouldn't try to break him into submission, someone who'd let him choose to trust instead of forcing it. Colt moved to Thunder's head, studying the stallion with professional appreciation. You've got a gift, Lydia. A real one. I've seen horse trainers work their whole lives and never develop the kind of instinct you've got. The praise warmed her more than it should have. My father would say, I'm just good with broken things because I'm broken myself. Then your father was wrong about that too. Colt reached up, his hand resting on her knee for just a moment. Brief, warm, steady. You're not broken, Lydia. You're just stronger than the people who tried to break you, and they couldn't handle that. Their eyes met and held, and Lydia felt that electric current again, the same one from the night they'd shaken hands, only stronger now, more insistent. Thunder shifted beneath her and Colt stepped back, breaking the moment. But something had changed. Something had shifted between them like tectonic plates finding a new configuration. I should let you work, Colt said, his voice rougher than usual. But Lydia, when you're done here, would you join me for a ride? There's something I'd like to show you. I'd like that. Good. Meet me at the barn in an hour. He walked away, and Lydia sat on Thunder's back watching him go, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hope. An hour later, she met Colt at the barn as promised. He'd saddled 2 horses, his big bay gelding and gentle Daisy for her, and packed saddlebags with canteens and what looked like food wrapped in cloth. Where are we going? Lydia asked as she mounted. You'll see. Colt swung into his saddle with easy grace. It's about a mile north, trust me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than just an afternoon ride. Lydia thought about all the times she'd been asked to trust. Her father, who'd used that trust to hurt her. Ruby, who'd betrayed it without a second thought. The wagon driver who'd complained about her weight for 3 solid weeks. But Colt had kept his word. He'd said she could stay, and he'd meant it. He'd said she'd earned her place, and he'd treated her like it was true. He'd looked at her bleeding hands and stopped her from hurting herself further, had watched her work with Thunder and called it a gift instead of a waste. I trust you, she said. They rode north across the prairie, and Lydia let herself simply feel. The sun on her face, the horse beneath her, the vast Montana landscape opening up in every direction. Colt rode beside her, not talking much, just occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of ranch history. My father lost everything to drink and bad decisions, he said at one point, his voice matter-of-fact but his jaw tight. I was 17 when the bank took our land in Texas. Swore I'd never end up like him, never let liquor or stupidity cost me what I'd built. Is that why you sent for a bride? The question slipped out before Lydia could stop it. To build something permanent? Something that couldn't be taken away? Colt glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. I sent for a bride because I was tired of being alone. Because I'd built this ranch from nothing, and it felt empty with just me rattling around in it. I thought... He stopped, shook his head. I thought a wife would make it feel like a home instead of just a place I worked myself to death. And then you got me instead of Ruby. And then I got you instead of Ruby, he agreed. And I was angry about that, Lydia. Won't pretend I wasn't. I'd made plans in my head, decided how things would be. Then you stepped off that wagon, and every single one of those plans went up in smoke. Lydia's throat went tight. I'm sorry. Don't be. Colt pulled his horse to a stop, and Lydia stopped beside him. They'd reached a small rise, and below them spread a valley she hadn't seen before. A creek cutting through green meadow, cottonwoods providing shade, wildflowers painting the grass in purple and gold. It was the most beautiful thing Lydia had ever seen. I was angry at the wrong thing. I was angry because I thought I'd been cheated, thought I'd ordered the pretty package and got stuck with the damaged one instead. The word stung, even though Lydia had heard variations of them her whole life. She started to turn Daisy away, but Colt's voice stopped her. But I was wrong, Lydia, because you're not damaged. You're real. Ruby, whoever she is She's probably beautiful and polished and exactly what I thought I wanted. But you're the one who stands in storms. You're the one who works until your hands bleed and shows up the next morning anyway. You're the one who can gentle a wild horse and rebuild a fence and make my ranch hands respect you in 3 weeks flat." He turned in his saddle to look at her directly. "You're real, and you're here. And I'm starting to think that maybe the joke your father played ended up being the best damn thing that ever happened to me." Lydia couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at Colt Brennan while her whole world rearranged itself around his words. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I'm trying to be honest." Colt dismounted and came to her side, reaching up to help her down. "Because you deserve honesty after living with people who treated you like a burden. And because I wanted to bring you here, to my favorite place on this whole ranch, and tell you that I'm glad you're here, Lydia Marsh. I'm glad your father sent you instead of Ruby. I'm glad you didn't quit or run or give up. I'm just glad." He lifted her down from the saddle, and for a moment they stood there, his hands on her waist, her hands on his shoulders, faces so close she could see the silver threading through his stubble and the way his eyes had gone soft in a way she'd never seen before. "Colt," she breathed, and she didn't even know what she was asking for. Permission, maybe, or courage, or just confirmation that this was real and not another cruel joke waiting to reveal its punchline. "I know." His voice was rough, his hands tightening fractionally on her waist. "I know this is complicated. I know you've got no reason to trust that I mean what I'm saying. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see a joke or a substitute or anything broken. I see a woman who's stronger than anyone I've ever met, and that scares the hell out of me, but it also makes me want—" He stopped, jaw working, and Lydia saw the moment he decided against finishing that sentence. Instead, he released her waist and stepped back, leaving her cold in the warm afternoon. "Come on," he said, his voice carefully controlled now. "I brought food. We can eat by the creek." They spread a blanket under the cottonwoods and ate bread and cheese while the water murmured over stones and birds sang in the branches overhead. Colt told her about his plans for expanding the herd, about the cattle market and the railroad coming closer each year. Lydia told him about Thunder's progress, about the garden she wanted to plant near the house, about small dreams she'd never dared speak aloud before. And beneath the ordinary conversation, something hummed between them. Want and wariness all tangled up together, both of them dancing around the thing neither was quite ready to name. When they finally rode back to the ranch as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lydia felt like she was returning as someone different from the woman who'd left. Someone who'd been called real and strong and wanted. Someone who was starting to believe it might be true. That night, she lay in bed replaying every word, every look, every moment his hands had touched her waist. And when sleep finally came, she dreamed not of Philadelphia or her father's laughter, but of a creek running through wildflower meadows and a man who called her strength instead of burden. The days following their ride to the creek felt different to Lydia, like the whole ranch had tilted slightly on its axis and nothing sat quite the way it had before. Colt didn't avoid her. If anything, he seemed to find more reasons to be wherever she was working. He'd appear at Thunder's paddock with questions about the stallion's training, or he'd join her in the garden pretending he needed to check the irrigation while she weeded between the rows of carrots and beans. Their conversations stayed carefully neutral, focused on work and weather and the 100 small decisions that kept a ranch running, but underneath the ordinary words ran a current of something electric and unnamed. Henry noticed first, naturally. The old ranch hand had eyes like a hawk and the discretion of a priest, but even he couldn't hide his knowing smile when Colt invented yet another reason to walk past where Lydia was mending tack in the barn. "Boss sure is finding a lot of interest in the equipment shed these days," Henry murmured to Lydia one afternoon, watching Colt inspect a saddle he'd already checked twice that week. "Must be real concerned about the state of our leather goods." Lydia felt heat climb her cheeks. "He's just being thorough." "Oh, he's being something all right." Henry's eyes twinkled. "And if I'm not mistaken, you're being something right back at him." "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you don't, miss. Sure you don't." Henry gathered his tools, still grinning. "For what it's worth, I think it's good. Man's been alone too long, and you've got a way of softening his harder edges. Makes him remember how to smile, which is something I haven't seen much of in the years I've worked here." He left Lydia sitting there with needle and thread frozen in her hands,
her heart doing complicated gymnastics in her chest. Was it that obvious? Could everyone see the way her breath caught when Colt walked into a room, the way her whole body seemed to orient toward him like a compass finding north? And more terrifying, could they see the way he looked at her when he thought nobody was watching, with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen and wanted all at once? That evening, after the supper dishes were cleared and the ranch hands had retreated to the bunkhouse for cards and whiskey, Lydia found herself alone with Colt in the kitchen. He was doing the books at the big table, lantern light casting shadows across his face as he frowned at columns of numbers. She'd been about to head upstairs, but something made her pause in the doorway, just watching him. "You're staring," Colt said without looking up from his ledger. "I can feel it." Lydia's face went hot. "I was just wondering if I'm going to burst into flames from all this arithmetic." He glanced up finally, and there was something almost playful in his expression. "Because I might. Numbers and I have never been friendly. I could help if you wanted." The offer came out before she'd fully thought it through. "I used to manage my father's household accounts. I'm decent with figures." Colt's eyebrows rose. "You offering to do my books?" "I'm offering to help with whatever needs doing." Lydia moved into the room, drawn by something stronger than caution. "That's what I'm here for, isn't it? To help?" "You're here because—" Colt stopped, something shifting in his expression. "Come here, Lydia." It wasn't a command exactly, but it wasn't quite a request either. Lydia crossed to the table, her pulse hammering, and Colt pushed the ledger toward her, pointing to a column that didn't balance. "These cattle sales should match up with what I deposited at the bank last month, but I'm coming up $40 short, and I can't figure where it went." His shoulder brushed hers as he leaned in to point out the discrepancy, and Lydia had to focus very hard on the numbers instead of the warmth radiating from him. "Either I'm missing an entry or I miscalculated somewhere." Lydia scanned the columns, her mind settling into the familiar rhythm of accounting. It took her less than 5 minutes to spot the problem, a transposed number in the second week's tally. "There," she said, pointing. "You wrote 74 instead of 47. The difference is exactly what you're missing." Colt stared at the ledger, then at her, something like wonder crossing his face. "How did you do that so fast?" "I told you, I'm decent with figures." Lydia allowed herself a small smile. "Numbers make sense to me in a way people never really did. They follow rules, they're predictable. Unlike people." Unlike people," she agreed softly. Colt leaned back in his chair, studying her with that intensity that made her feel like he was seeing through skin to something deeper. "Your father really was a fool, wasn't he? Had a daughter who could gentle horses and balance books and stand in storms, and he treated her like she was worthless. He treated me like I was the wrong daughter." The words came out quiet but steady. "And maybe I was. The wrong daughter for the life he wanted to give me. But I'm starting to think maybe I was exactly the right daughter for the life I was meant to have." "Which is what? This?" Colt gestured around the kitchen, the ranch beyond. "Hauling water and mending fences in the middle of Montana?" "Maybe." Lydia met his eyes directly. "Is that so hard to believe? That I might want this? That I might be happier here, working until my hands bleed, than I ever was in Philadelphia wearing pretty dresses and pretending to care about tea parties?" Colt's expression went soft in a way that stole her breath. "No," he said quietly. "It's not hard to believe at all, because I'm starting to think that maybe you were exactly the right woman for the life I was meant to have, too." The air between them went thick and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Lydia's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. Colt's hand moved across the table, crossing that careful distance they'd been maintaining, and his fingers brushed hers where they rested on the ledger. "Lydia," he started, his voice rough with something that might have been want or fear or both tangled together, and then hoofbeats pounded up the road, fast and urgent, shattering the moment like dropped glass. Colt was on his feet instantly, hand dropping to the rifle he kept by the door. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the sound. But Lydia followed him anyway, because staying put and being safe had never been part of who she was becoming. They emerged onto the porch just as a rider came tearing into the yard, horse lathered and blowing hard. In the lamplight spilling from the house, Lydia could see it was a young man she didn't recognize,
barely more than a boy, his face pale with exhaustion. "Mr. Brennan!" The rider half fell from his saddle, catching himself against the horse's shoulder. "I rode from town fast as I could. There's a woman, she came on the afternoon stage, says she's your bride. Your real bride. She's at the hotel demanding to know where you are and why you haven't come to claim her." The world seemed to stop turning. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard Colt swear, low and vicious. "What's her name?" His voice came out hard as iron. "Ruby Marsh, sir. Says you sent for her months ago, and she's here to marry you like was arranged." Ruby. Of course it was Ruby. Beautiful, perfect Ruby, who'd probably realized that being a rancher's wife in Montana was better than being a banker's wife in Philadelphia, after all. Ruby, who'd decided she wanted what she'd let Lydia take in her place. Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. Beside her, Colt stood rigid as a fence post, his jaw working like he was trying to chew through something bitter. "She's at the hotel?" he asked finally. "Yes, sir," creating quite a fuss from what I heard. "Saying she's been wronged, that someone must have stolen her place, that you owe her a wedding." Christ. Colt dragged a hand through his hair, and when he turned to look at Lydia, his expression was anguished. I have to go deal with this. I know." Lydia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You should go. You should talk to her." "Lydia, she's the one you sent for, Colt. The one whose picture you have, the one you made plans for. Of course you need to go." Each word felt like swallowing glass, but she forced them out anyway. "I'll be here when you get back. We can talk then." Something desperate flashed in Colt's eyes. "This doesn't change. Just go." She couldn't listen to promises he might not be able to keep, couldn't stand here and watch him choose between the bride he'd wanted and the one he'd been stuck with. "Please, just go deal with it." For a moment she thought he might argue, might say something that would make this hurt less. Instead, he nodded once, sharp and final, then turned to the exhausted rider. "Get yourself some water and rest. I'll saddle a fresh horse and head to town now." He was gone in minutes, disappearing into the barn and emerging on his big bay, riding hard toward town and Ruby and the life he'd originally planned. Lydia stood on the porch watching until the darkness swallowed him completely, and only then did she let herself shake. Henry appeared at her elbow, seemingly out of nowhere. "Come inside, miss. You're white as a ghost." "She's here, Henry." Lydia heard her voice crack. "Ruby's actually here. She came for him." Seems like she did. Henry's hand was gentle on her shoulder, steering her back into the house. "But that doesn't mean... It means everything." Lydia sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where Colt had been showing her his ledgers just minutes ago, where his fingers had brushed hers and she'd let herself think. She's what he wanted, Henry, beautiful and perfect and exactly what he asked for. What man wouldn't choose that over... She gestured helplessly at herself. "A man who's got eyes and sense." Henry sat down across from her, his weathered face serious. "Miss Lydia, I've watched Colt these past weeks. I've seen how he looks at you when you're working with Thunder, how he finds excuses to be near you, how he smiles more in a month than he has in 3 years. That's not a man settling for second choice. That's a man who's figured out what he really wants." But what if I was just convenient? The fear she'd been holding at bay came rushing out. What if he was just making the best of a bad situation, and now that Ruby's here, he can have what he actually wanted all along? Then he's a damn fool, and I've misjudged him completely. Henry reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "But I don't think I have. I think you're scared, which is natural, but don't decide what Colt's going to choose before he's had a chance to choose it." Lydia wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that the past weeks had meant what she thought they meant, that Colt's words by the creek had been real, that she wasn't about to be discarded for the prettier sister yet again. But belief was hard when you'd spent 24 years learning that you were never the first choice, never the one anyone actually wanted. She sat at that table long after Henry had gone to check on the horses, sat there until the lamp oil burned low and the house settled into silence around her. Through the window she could see stars scattered across the Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. The same stars that had watched her arrive weeks ago, expecting to be sent straight back home. She'd survived so much since then. Survived Colt's disappointment and the ranch's brutal work and her own certainty that she'd never be good enough. She'd learned to stand in storms and gentle wild horses and believe, just a little, that maybe she had value beyond what her father had assigned her. But this, watching Colt ride to town to meet the woman he'd actually wanted, this might be the storm that finally broke her. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Lydia moved from the kitchen to the porch, wrapping herself in a shawl against the night chill, unable to go upstairs to her room where she'd just lie awake anyway. She didn't hear Henry approach until he was settling into the chair beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Figured you could use this," he said, passing her a cup. "And some company." "Thank you." Lydia wrapped her hands around the warm tin, grateful for something to hold on to. "You should be sleeping, Henry. Morning comes early." "Morning always comes early. I can miss a few hours of sleep to sit with a friend." He sipped his coffee, gazing out at the dark ranch. "You know, I've been working ranches since I was 14 years old. Seen a lot of hired hands come and go, a lot of relationships start and end. A lot of people make choices that didn't make a lick of sense to anyone but them." "Is this the part where you tell me everything happens for a reason?" "Hell no, some things just happen, and they're terrible, and there's no good reason for any of it." Henry's voice was matter-of-fact. "But I've also seen people surprise themselves with what they're capable of choosing when it matters. I've seen men walk away from what they thought they wanted because they figured out what they needed instead. And I've seen women who thought they weren't worth choosing become the only choice that made any sense at all." Lydia looked at him, this kind man who'd shown her nothing but respect since the moment she'd arrived. What if Ruby's everything Colt thought he wanted? What if she's beautiful and charming and then she's beautiful and charming? Henry interrupted. "But she's not you, miss. She's not the woman who stood in a storm to save his barn. She's not the one who works until her hands bleed and shows up the next day anyway. She's not the one who gentled thunder when every man on this ranch had given up. And Colt knows that. Question is, do you trust him to make the right choice?" Did she? Lydia turned the question over in her mind, examining it from all angles like a stone checked for flaws. Trust had been beaten out of her so thoroughly in Philadelphia that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. But Colt had been different from the start, even in his disappointment, even in his anger. He'd been honest. He'd kept his word. He'd looked at her, really looked at her, and called her strong. "I want to trust him," she admitted quietly. "But Henry, I've been the second choice my whole life. I was the wrong daughter, the ugly sister, the joke my father played. What if that's all I'll ever be? What if you stop deciding you're not enough before anyone else gets a chance to decide for themselves?" Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "You've spent your whole life believing what cruel people told you about yourself, Miss Lydia. Maybe it's time to start believing what the kind ones are saying instead." Before Lydia could respond, they heard hoofbeats again, slower this time, tired. Her heart kicked into her throat. Colt was back. She stood as he rode into the yard, dismounting with the heavy movements of a man who'd spent hours in the saddle dealing with something difficult. In the porch lamplight, she could see his face was drawn, exhausted, but his eyes found hers immediately, holding her gaze as he climbed the steps. "Henry," he said, not looking away from Lydia, "could you give us a minute?" "Sure thing, boss." Henry squeezed Lydia's shoulder once as he passed. "Remember what I said, miss." Then they were alone, Lydia and Colt, with the night pressing in around them and everything hanging in the balance between them. "She's really here," Lydia said, because someone had to break the silence. "Ruby's really here." "She's here." Colt's voice was rough, worn thin. "Showed up on the afternoon stage with 3 trunks and a story about how she'd changed her mind, realized she'd made a mistake letting you go in her place. Said she was ready to honor the arrangement now, ready to be my wife like we'd agreed." Each word felt like a knife sliding between Lydia's ribs, but she kept her face steady, refused to let him see her bleed. "I see. And what did you say?" "I said—" Colt stopped, dragged a hand through his hair. "I said a lot of things, but mostly I said that she was 3 months too late and the arrangement was finished." Lydia's breath caught. "You... what?" "I told her I'd sent for a bride and I got one, and that bride was you.
I told her she'd given up her place when she let you take it, and I wasn't interested in trading now. Colt moved closer, and Lydia could see exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. She didn't take it well. I imagine not. Lydia's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirt to still them. She's very beautiful, Colt. Very charming. Very not you. He was close enough now that she could smell horse and night air and something uniquely him. Lydia, she's exactly what I thought I wanted when I sent those letters. Pretty and polished and proper. Perfect ranch wife material, or so I thought. Then why? Because perfect ranch wife material doesn't mean a damn thing if she's not the right woman. Colt's hands came up to frame her face, gentle and sure.
Ruby Marsh spent 20 minutes telling me about her accomplishments, her skills, how she'd be an asset to my ranch and my reputation. But she never once asked about the horses or the land or what kind of life she'd actually be living here. She talked about hiring staff and hosting parties and making the house presentable for society. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Lydia felt tears gathering despite her best efforts. She talked about everything except the one thing that matters, actually wanting to be here, actually wanting this life, actually wanting me. And you think Lydia's voice broke. You think I want you? I think you stand in storms with me. Colt's voice was fierce now, his eyes burning into hers. I think you work this land like it's yours. I think you gentle wild horses and balance my books and make my ranch hands respect you. I think you show up every single day and choose this place, choose this life, choose... He stopped, swallowed hard. Choose me. Even when I was an ass to you. Even when I treated you like an obligation. Even when you had every reason to give up and go home. Tears spilled over now, tracking hot down Lydia's face. I choose you because there's nowhere else I want to be. Because this ranch feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Because you look at me and see someone strong instead of someone broken, and that changes everything. Lydia, her name came out like a prayer. When I rode to town tonight, I was angry. Angry that Ruby showed up and complicated everything. Angry that I'd have to look at her and remember what I'd thought I wanted. Angry that I'd have to choose. But you know what I realized? What? That it wasn't a choice at all. Because looking at Ruby, perfect, beautiful Ruby, all I could think about was you. About your hands on Thunder's neck, and your stubbornness rebuilding that fence, and the way you looked at the creek when I told you I was glad you were here. All I could see was that she wasn't you, and nobody who isn't you will ever be enough. Lydia's breath shuddered out. Colt, I'm not good with words, Lydia. I'm a rancher, not a poet. But I need you to understand, when your father put you on that wagon as a joke, he gave me the best gift anyone's ever given me. He sent me you, real, stubborn, strong you. And I'm choosing you, Lydia Marsh, not because Ruby's gone, or because you're convenient, or because I'm settling. I'm choosing you because you're the only woman I want to choose. Even though The old fears rose up, choking her. Even though I'm not pretty like her, not small or... Stop. Colt's voice was gentle but firm. I don't give a damn what you look like compared to Ruby or anyone else. When I look at you, I see a woman who survived things that would have broken most people. I see strength and courage and a heart that keeps choosing to be kind even after the world's been cruel. That's beautiful, Lydia. That's the kind of beautiful that matters. She was crying in earnest now, great heaving sobs that she couldn't control, years of believing she wasn't enough crashing against the reality of this moment. Colt pulled her into his arms, and she let him, let herself be held while she fell apart and put herself back together in a new configuration. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. I'm scared this is a dream, and I'll wake up back in Philadelphia. I'm scared you'll change your mind. I'm scared... I know. His hand moved in slow circles on her back. I'm scared too. Scared I'll mess this up, scared I don't deserve you, scared you'll realize you could do better than a rough rancher in the middle of Montana. But Lydia, I want to be scared with you, want to figure this out together, want to build something real with someone who actually wants to be here. Lydia pulled back enough to look at him, this man who'd been so angry when she'd first arrived, who'd given her the hardest jobs expecting her to fail, who'd slowly, so slowly, started to see her instead of his disappointment. His face was open now,
vulnerable in a way she'd never seen, and she realized he was telling the truth. He was just as scared as she was, just as uncertain, just as terrified of wanting something that might not last. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" A small smile tugged at Colt's mouth. "Now I tell Ruby she needs to leave town. Now I make it clear to everyone that you're not a substitute or a replacement. You're my choice. And now," he paused, his hand still framing her face, "now I kiss you, if you'll let me, because I've been wanting to do that for weeks, and I'm done pretending I don't." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm not very good at being kissed. I've never—" "Neither am I." Colt's smile widened. "Guess we'll figure it out together." Then his mouth was on hers, gentle and sure, and Lydia felt the whole world narrow to this, his lips moving against hers, his hands steady on her face, the taste of coffee and something deeper. She'd imagined first kisses during all those lonely years in Philadelphia, had pictured them as earth-shattering and perfect, and everything romance novels promised. This was better. This was real. This was two people who'd survived storms, finding shelter in each other, two people who'd been broken by the world learning to be whole together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. "I meant it," he said quietly. "Every word. You're not a joke, Lydia. You're not a mistake. You're mine, if you'll have me. And I'm yours, if you want me." "I want you," Lydia whispered. "God help me, I want you so much it terrifies me." "Good." Colt kissed her again, briefer this time, but no less intense. "Be terrified with me. Be brave with me. Be here with me. Here. I'm not going anywhere." They stood on that porch wrapped in each other, while the Montana night stretched wide and endless around them. And for the first time in her life, Lydia Marsh felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the memory of Colt's kiss still burning on her lips, so vivid she had to touch her mouth to confirm it had actually happened. Her fingers came away ordinary, unchanged, but everything else felt different. The room looked the same. Same iron bed, same battered dresser, same view of endless prairie. But she was seeing it through new eyes, eyes that belonged to a woman who'd been chosen instead of settled for. She dressed quickly, her hands fumbling with buttons in her haste, and made her way downstairs where she could already hear voices in the kitchen. Henry was at the stove as usual, but this morning Jake and Dawson were there too, both of them looking at her with expressions that told her the whole ranch already knew something had shifted. "Morning, Miss Lydia," Jake said, grinning like he'd just won money on a bet. "Sleep well?" "Well enough." Lydia felt heat climb her cheeks as she poured coffee. "Is Colt already out checking the south pasture?" Henry answered, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "Said he'd be back by noon. Also said," he paused, something warm and knowing in his weathered face. "Said to tell you he meant every word he said last night, in case you were wondering." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Dawson's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Jake's grin widened until Lydia thought his face might split. Even Henry looked pleased, like he'd personally orchestrated something wonderful. "Well, damn," Dawson said finally. "About time that man came to his senses." "You knew?" Lydia stared at them. "You all knew?" "Miss, we got eyes," Jake said. "Been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Only question was how long it'd take Colt to pull his head out and actually do something about it." And the answer, Henry added with satisfaction, was exactly as long as it took Ruby Marsh to show up and make him choose between what he thought he wanted and what he actually needs. Lydia sank into her chair, overwhelmed by their easy acceptance, their obvious pleasure in this turn of events. "Ruby's still in town," she said quietly. "She came all this way. She must be furious," Dawson supplied cheerfully, "which is her own damn fault for thinking she could waltz in months late and claim what she'd already given up. Actions have consequences, and hers was losing a good man to a better woman." "I'm not—" Lydia stopped herself, recognizing the old pattern trying to reassert itself. The instinct to deny, to diminish, to insist she wasn't good enough. But Colt's words from last night echoed in her mind. "You're strong, you're real, you're the only woman I want to choose. Maybe it was time to start believing it. "Thank you," she said instead. "That's kind of you to say."
"Ain't kindness if it's truth," Dawson muttered into his coffee. Lydia ate her breakfast surrounded by men who'd gone from skeptical observers to something like allies. And for the first time since arriving at the Brennan Ranch, she felt like she might actually belong here. Not just as a worker or an obligation, but as someone who mattered. Someone who'd earned her place not despite who she was, but because of it. After breakfast, she made her way to Thunder's paddock, eager for the peace that came from working with the stallion. He nickered when he saw her, trotting over to the fence with his ears forward, and Lydia felt something settle in her chest. This horse had been the first thing on the ranch to accept her without reservation, to trust her when everyone else saw only disappointment. "Morning, beautiful," she murmured, running her hand down his face. "Big day today. Think you're ready to actually carry me somewhere instead of just standing still while I sit on you?" Thunder snorted, tossing his head, and Lydia laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." She spent the next hour working with him, first in the paddock and then, heart in her throat, through the gate and into the open area beyond. Thunder tensed when she asked him to leave his familiar space, but he trusted her enough to try. They walked in slow circles, Lydia keeping her hands light on the reins, her voice steady and soothing. When the stallion finally relaxed into an easy walk, responding to her cues like they'd been partners for years instead of weeks, she felt tears prick her eyes. "That's my boy," she whispered. "Such a good, brave boy." "He looks like a different horse." Lydia's head snapped up to find Colt leaning against the paddock fence, watching them with an expression of pure wonder. He must have just returned from the south pasture, his shirt dusty and his hat pushed back, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough to see you take him outside the paddock for the first time. Long enough to watch you turn a horse nobody could handle into one that moves like he's dancing." Colt climbed through the fence, approaching slowly so as not to spook Thunder. "You've got magic in you, Lydia Marsh. That's the only explanation for what you just did." Not magic, just patience and understanding, but Lydia couldn't help the flush of pleasure at his praise. "He wanted to be good, Colt. He just needed someone to show him it was safe to try." Colt reached Thunder's side, running an assessing hand down the stallion's shoulder. Thunder allowed it, which was progress in itself. A month ago, he'd have tried to bite anyone who got this close. "How long before I can ride him, you think?" "Another few weeks, maybe." Lydia shifted in the saddle. "He's learning to trust, but he's not ready for a heavier rider yet. Needs more time to build confidence before—" "No rush." Colt looked up at her, something soft and fierce in his expression. "Take all the time you need, both of you. I'm not going anywhere." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Lydia felt her throat go tight. "About last night." "No regrets?" Colt's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "No regrets," she said firmly. "But Colt, Ruby's still in town. She's leaving on tomorrow's stage." Colt's voice was flat, final. "I made that clear when I went back this morning to settle her hotel bill. Told her she'd made her choice 3 months ago when she let you take her place, and I'd made mine last night when I chose to keep you. She's not happy about it." "I imagine not." Lydia couldn't quite suppress the small, mean part of her that took satisfaction in that. Ruby had spent their whole lives being the chosen one, the wanted one, the one everyone preferred. For once, just this once, Lydia had been picked instead. "What did she say?" Colt's jaw went tight. "A lot of things I won't repeat in polite company. Called you names I won't dignify by repeating. Said I was a fool for choosing the fat sister over the beautiful one. That I'd regret it when you proved too lazy or too weak to handle ranch life." His eyes blazed. "I told her she didn't know a damn thing about you, that you'd worked harder in 3 weeks than she'd probably worked in her whole life, and that she could take her beauty and her cruelty and get the hell out of my town." Lydia's vision blurred with tears. Nobody had ever defended her like that. Nobody had ever stood up to Ruby on her behalf, had ever chosen Lydia's value over Ruby's appearance. "You said that? Really said that?" "Every word." Colt moved to Thunder's side, reaching up to help Lydia dismount. His hand spanned her waist, strong and sure, lowering her carefully to the ground. But he didn't let go once her feet touched dirt. Instead, he pulled her closer until they stood chest to chest with Thunder nosing curiously at their shoulders. Lydia, I need you to understand something. What Ruby said about you being lazy or weak or not good enough, that's poison. That's the same poison your father fed you your whole life, and I won't have it on my ranch or in your head. It's hard not to hear it. Lydia's voice came out small. When you've been told something your whole life, it gets inside you, becomes part of how you see yourself. Then we'll work on that. Colt's thumb brushed her cheek, gentle and deliberate. Same way you worked with Thunder, patient and steady and refusing to give up, even when it seems impossible. I'll tell you you're strong every day until you start believing it. Tell you you're beautiful until you can hear it without flinching. Tell you you're wanted until it sinks in deep enough that Ruby's poison can't reach anymore. I might never fully believe it, Lydia whispered. Might always have that voice in my head saying I'm not enough. Then I'll just have to be louder than the voice. Colt kissed her forehead, soft and sweet. Come on. Let's get Thunder settled and head to the house. We need to talk about some things. They walked back together, Thunder following placidly on a lead rope, and Lydia tried to prepare herself for whatever conversation was coming. But when they reached the house and Colt guided her to the sitting room, a space she'd barely entered because it felt too formal, too much like a room meant for the lady of the house she wasn't sure she was, her preparation evaporated. Sit, Colt said, gesturing to the worn sofa. When she did, he settled beside her, close enough that their knees touched. I've been thinking about how to do this properly. Tried to come up with pretty words or romantic gestures, but that's not who I am. So I'm just going to say it plain. Lydia's heart hammered. Say what plain? I sent for a mail-order bride because I wanted a wife, someone to share this ranch with, someone to build a life with. When you showed up instead of Ruby, I was angry because my plans had changed without my permission. But these past weeks, working alongside you, watching you refuse to quit even when I gave you every reason to, seeing you gentle Thunder and stand in storms and make this place feel less empty, he stopped, swallowed hard. You've become what I was looking for, Lydia. What I needed without knowing I needed it, and I want to make this official, want to actually marry you if you're willing. The world tilted on its axis. You want to marry me? I want to marry you, Colt confirmed. Not because it was the original arrangement, not because you're convenient or because Ruby's gone. I want to marry you because I choose you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and know you're here by choice, not obligation, because I want this ranch to be ours, not just mine with you working on it. Colt, Lydia's voice broke. You barely know me. I know you stand when everyone expects you to fall. I know you're kind to horses and patient with people even when they don't deserve it. I know you're strong and stubborn, and you don't quit, even when quitting would be easier. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. I know that when I look at you, I see home. And maybe that's not everything, but it's enough for me. Question is it enough for you? Lydia looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred from years of ranch work, hers still healing from fence repairs and chicken attacks. She thought about Philadelphia and her father's laughter, about Ruby's casual cruelty and all the years of being told she wasn't worthy of being chosen. Then she thought about the past weeks, the blisters and the storms, and the moments when Colt's respect had felt harder won and more valuable than any easy affection. This wasn't a fairy tale. Colt wasn't a prince sweeping her off her feet with grand declarations. He was a rough rancher offering her a partnership built on mutual respect and honest work, and the beginnings of something that might be love if they gave it time to grow. And somehow, that felt more real and more valuable than any romantic fantasy. Yes, she said. Yes, it's enough. More than enough. Relief flooded Colt's face, so profound she realized he'd actually been scared she might refuse. Yeah? Yeah. Lydia squeezed his hand. I want to marry you, Colt Brennan. Want to make this ranch ours instead of yours. Want to wake up every morning knowing I chose to be here and you chose to have me. Want to, her voice caught. Want to be wanted just for once in my life. And you make me feel wanted. Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her chest. You are wanted, he said fiercely. So wanted, it scares me sometimes. So wanted I rode to town last night ready to send the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen packing, because she wasn't you. They sat like that for a long moment, just holding each other, letting the enormity of what they'd just decided settle into their bones. Then Colt pulled back, something almost shy crossing his face. "I should probably do this properly," he said, and before Lydia could ask what he meant, he was sliding off the sofa onto one knee in front of her. "Colt, you don't have to." "I want to." He took her hand again, looking up at her with gray eyes gone soft. "Lydia Marsh, you came to my ranch as a joke and became the best thing that ever happened to me. You've worked my land and gentled my horses and made me remember how to smile. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my choice?" Lydia's vision blurred with tears for what felt like the 100th time that morning. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Colt grinned, actually grinned, wide and genuine and transforming his whole face, and stood to pull her up with him, spinning her once before kissing her breathless. And Lydia laughed against his mouth, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep and long dormant, finally allowed to surface. They were still kissing when boots sounded on the porch and Henry's voice called out, "Boss, you in here? We've got— oh!" The old ranch hand stopped dead in the doorway, taking in the scene. Then his weathered face split into the biggest smile Lydia had ever seen on him. "Well, damn. I take it congratulations are in order?" Colt kept one arm around Lydia's waist, pulling her close against his side. "They are. Lydia's agreed to marry me." "About damn time." Henry's eyes were suspiciously bright. "When's the wedding?" Colt looked at Lydia. "Soon as we can arrange it? No point in waiting when I've already decided." "Soon as we can arrange it," Lydia agreed, still half in shock that this was real, that she was standing in Colt Brennan's sitting room wearing his arm around her waist while he told his foreman they were getting married. "I'll spread the word to the hands," Henry said. "They'll want to celebrate proper. And Miss Lydia?" He caught her eye, serious now. "Welcome home, officially." After Henry left, Colt and Lydia stood together in the sitting room, the late morning sun painting everything gold, and Lydia felt something settle into place in her chest. Home. She was home. Not the house in Philadelphia where she'd never been wanted, not the bare room upstairs where she'd slept for the past weeks, uncertain of her place. This, Colt's arm around her, the ranch spreading out beyond the windows, the life they were about to build together. This was home. "I should probably write to my father," she said. "Tell him I'm getting married." Colt's arm tightened around her. "You don't owe him that." "No, but I want to. Want him to know that his joke, his cruel, heartless joke, ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. Want him to know I found someone who sees value in what he threw away." She looked up at Colt. "Want him to know I won." Something fierce and proud blazed in Colt's expression. "Then write to him. Tell him his daughter, the one he tried to discard, is marrying a man who owns 3,000 acres of prime Montana rangeland and has a future as bright as this sky is wide. Tell him you're happy and loved and exactly where you're meant to be." Loved? Lydia's breath caught on the word. Colt's hand came up to cup her face. "Getting there," he admitted. "Not quite there yet, but close enough I can see it from here. That scare you?" "Terrifies me," Lydia said honestly, "but in a good way. The way standing in storms terrifies me, exciting and dangerous and alive." "Then be terrified with me," Colt said, echoing his words from last night. "And we'll figure out the love part as we go." They spent the rest of the day in a strange kind of limbo between their old relationship and their new one. Lydia still did her chores, still fed the chickens and worked with Thunder and helped Henry in the garden. But now when Colt found excuses to be near her, he'd steal kisses when nobody was looking. Quick brushes of lips against her temple, her cheek, her mouth, like he was making up for lost time. The ranch hands treated the news with cheerful ribbing and genuine happiness. Jake kept grinning at them like they'd given him the best entertainment he'd seen in months. Dawson grumbled that it was about time and demanded to know if there'd be cake at the wedding. Even the horses seemed to sense something had changed, Thunder nickering softly whenever Lydia approached, Daisy nuzzling her shoulder with gentle affection. But it was late that night, after supper was done and the ranch had settled into quiet, that reality caught up with Lydia. She was standing in her room brushing out her hair when she heard a soft knock on her door. "It's me," Colt's voice came through the wood. Can I come in? Lydia's heart raced. They were engaged now, but they weren't married yet, and having a man in her bedroom felt scandalous, even if that man was her fiancé. Still, she opened the door. Colt stood in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him. I needed to make sure you were okay, that you weren't regretting anything. I'm not regretting anything. Lydia stepped back to let him in. Propriety be damned. Are you? God, no. He closed the door behind him, but stayed near it, maintaining distance like he was afraid of overstepping. But Lydia, I need you to know. I'm not expecting anything from you, not until after we're married, and even then, only what you're willing to give. I know your father hurt you. I know the world's been cruel, and I won't add to that. We'll go at whatever pace you need. Something warm unfurled in Lydia's chest. Here was this big, rough rancher, standing in her doorway promising patience and care, offering her control over her own body and choices. It was the kind of respect she'd never expected to receive, the kind of tenderness she'd stopped believing existed. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. Colt nodded, still keeping his distance. I should go. Let you sleep. Just wanted to check on you. Colt? Lydia stopped him as he reached for the door. Will you stay? Just for a few minutes? I don't want anything improper. I just want to talk. Want to not be alone with all these feelings. Understanding softened his expression. He moved to the small chair by her window, settling into it while she perched on the edge of her bed, and they talked. About small things and large ones, about his childhood in Texas, and her lonely years in Philadelphia, about dreams for the ranch and hopes for their future. They talked until Lydia's eyes grew heavy, and her words started slurring with exhaustion. I should let you sleep, Colt said, standing, but he crossed to where she sat and pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and reverent. Sweet dreams, Lydia. Tomorrow we'll start planning our wedding. After he left, Lydia lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind too full for sleep despite her exhaustion. In less than a day, her whole world had turned upside down. Ruby had come and gone, Colt had chosen her, and now she was engaged to be married to a man who treated her like something precious instead of burdensome. It felt too good to be real, too perfect to last. And the scared part of her, the part that had been hurt too many times to fully trust happiness, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when this all revealed itself to be another elaborate joke. But morning came with sunlight and coffee and Colt's smile across the breakfast table, and the day after that brought more of the same, and slowly, Lydia began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. That she'd found something worth keeping, something that wouldn't be snatched away the moment she let herself want it. 3 days after Colt proposed, they rode into town together to arrange the wedding. It was Lydia's first time seeing the small Montana settlement that served the surrounding ranches, and she studied it with interest, the general store, the church, the saloon, the hotel where Ruby had stayed, the hotel where Ruby might still be staying. As if summoned by the thought, Ruby emerged from that very building just as Colt was helping Lydia down from her horse. For a frozen moment, the three of them stood in the dusty street staring at each other, Colt grim and protective, Lydia terrified and defiant, Ruby beautiful and furious. So this is really happening, Ruby said, her voice dripping with disdain. You're actually marrying her. Tomorrow, Colt said flatly. At the church. You're not invited. Ruby laughed, sharp and bitter. I wouldn't attend if you paid me. God, Colt, look at her. Really look at her. You're choosing that over me? I'm choosing Lydia over anyone, Colt said, his arm tightening around Lydia's waist. Including you. Especially you, given how you're acting right now. She's fat and plain and probably can't even give you children. Enough! Colt's voice cracked like a whip, and several passers-by stopped to watch the confrontation. You don't get to talk about her like that. You don't get to diminish her because you're angry I didn't choose you. Lydia is worth 10 of you, Ruby Marsh, and if you can't see that, then you're as blind as you are cruel. Ruby's perfect face twisted with rage. She turned to Lydia, eyes blazing. You think you've won? You think stealing my bridegroom makes you better than me? You're still the fat sister, Lydia, still the ugly one, and one day he'll wake up and realize what a mistake he made, and you'll be right back where you started, unwanted and alone. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing on old bruises,
old wounds. Lydia felt herself shrinking, felt the familiar urge to apologize, to make herself smaller, to accept Ruby's assessment as truth. But then Colt's hand squeezed her waist, and she heard his voice from that night on the porch. "You're strong. You're real. You're the only woman I want to choose." Lydia straightened her spine and met Ruby's eyes directly. "You're right," she said quietly, and saw surprise flicker across her sister's face. "I am bigger than you. I always have been. But you know what else I am, Ruby? I'm stronger. I'm braver. I'm kinder. I'm someone who can work all day in the sun and still show up the next morning. I'm someone who can gentle wild horses and stand in storms and make a man like Colt Brennan smile." "Lydia," Ruby started, but Lydia wasn't done. "You gave up your place here because you thought you had something better. Then you changed your mind and showed up expecting Colt to just accept you back like you hadn't already chosen someone else. But that's not how life works, Ruby. Actions have consequences. You chose Thomas Whitmore or Philadelphia or whatever was more appealing than this ranch, and Colt chose me. Not because I stole anything, but because I stayed, because I worked, because I showed him I wanted to be here." "You think you're special because he settled for you?" Ruby's voice was poison. "I think I'm special because he chose me," Lydia corrected. "There's a difference. And tomorrow, when we get married in that church, I'll be Mrs. Colt Brennan. I'll be the lady of his ranch, his partner, his wife. And you'll be on a stage heading back to Philadelphia with nothing but your beauty and your bitterness to keep you company." Ruby stared at her, shock giving way to pure fury. "You'll regret this, both of you. When the novelty wears off and he sees you for what you really are—" "I already see her for what she really is," Colt interrupted, his voice hard as iron. "And what she is the woman I love. Now get out of my sight, Ruby. Go catch your stage, go back to Philadelphia, go anywhere but here. You're not welcome in my town or my life anymore." Love. He'd said love. Lydia's heart stuttered in her chest, but she kept her eyes on Ruby, watching as her sister's beautiful face crumpled with rage and humiliation. For a long moment, Ruby looked like she might say something else, might launch one more attack. Then she spun on her heel and stalked back toward the hotel, her back rigid with wounded pride. Only after she disappeared inside did Lydia let herself sag against Colt, her strength suddenly deserting her. "I've got you," Colt murmured, holding her steady. "You did so good, Lydia, so good. I'm proud of you." "You said you loved me," Lydia whispered. "You said it in front of everyone." Colt turned her to face him, right there in the middle of the street with half the town watching. "I did, because it's true. I love you, Lydia Marsh. I'm in love with you. Have been for a while now, just took Ruby showing up to make me admit it." Tears spilled over, but Lydia was smiling through them. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since the night of the storm, when you looked at me like I was someone worth saving instead of someone worth leaving behind." Colt kissed her then, deep and thorough and completely improper for the middle of town in broad daylight. Someone whistled, someone else cheered. And Lydia Marsh, soon to be Lydia Brennan, kissed him back, choosing joy over fear, choosing to believe in this love they were building together. Tomorrow they'd be married. Tomorrow she'd officially become Mrs. Colt Brennan, partner in his ranch and his life. Tomorrow would be the beginning of forever. But today she stood in the street of a small Montana town with the man she loved holding her close, and she let herself feel it. Feel wanted, feel chosen, feel loved, and it was more than enough. The morning of her wedding, Lydia woke to find the entire ranch in motion around her. Through her window, she could hear Henry barking orders at Jake and Dawson, something about bringing the wagon around and making sure the horses were properly groomed. Pots clanged in the kitchen below, and she caught the scent of something sweet baking, cake maybe, or the pies Henry had mentioned making for the celebration afterward. She lay in bed for a moment longer, letting the reality of the day wash over her. Today she would marry Colt Brennan. Today she would stand in front of the whole town and pledge herself to a man who'd chosen her over beauty, who'd defended her against her own sister's cruelty, who'd looked at her and seen strength instead of burden. Today she would stop being Lydia Marsh, the unwanted daughter, the fat sister, the joke her father had played, and become Lydia Brennan, wife and partner and chosen woman. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts.
"Miss Lydia, you awake?"
Henry's voice carried through the wood. "Got something for you." "Come in," she called, sitting up and pulling her blanket around her shoulders. Henry entered carrying a dress draped over his arms, and Lydia's breath caught. It was beautiful, simple and elegant, made of cream-colored fabric with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing like the elaborate confections Ruby favored, but perfect in its understated grace. "Mrs. Crawford from the general store sent this over last night," Henry said, laying the dress carefully across her bed. "She and some of the other ranch wives got together and made it for you. Said every bride deserves a proper wedding dress, and they wanted to make sure you had one." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "They made this for me, but they barely know me." "They know enough." Henry's weathered face was gentle. "Word travels fast in small towns, miss."
"They heard about you working the ranch, about Thunder, about you standing up to your sister yesterday. They wanted to do something nice for the woman who's going to be Mrs. Brennan."
"I don't know what to say." "Say you'll wear it and make Colt's jaw drop when you walk down that aisle." Henry grinned. "Man's been pacing the barn since dawn like a caged bear. Never seen him this nervous about anything." After Henry left, Lydia rose and bathed in the lukewarm water someone had left heating by her fireplace. She washed her hair and braided it carefully, weaving in the few wildflowers she'd picked yesterday on a last ride across the ranch. Then she pulled on the dress the town women had made and turned to look at herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back was still her, still round-faced and soft-bodied, still nothing like Ruby's delicate beauty. But there was something different now, something in her eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago when she'd stepped off that wagon expecting to be sent home. She looked strong. She looked certain. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. She looked like a bride. Another knock came, and this time it was Jake poking his head in. "Everyone's ready when you are, Miss Lydia. Wagon's out front to take you to town." The ride to church was a blur of nerves and excitement. Henry drove while Jake and Dawson rode alongside, all three of them dressed in their Sunday best and looking proud as peacocks. Other ranchers and their families were already gathering at the small white church when they arrived, and Lydia felt a flutter of panic as she saw how many people had come. "They all want to see Colt finally get himself a wife," Henry said, helping her down from the wagon. "Been a long time coming, according to the gossips. You ready for this?" "No," Lydia admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Henry squeezed her hand. "That's my girl. Now come on. Can't keep the groom waiting much longer or he might wear a hole in the floor with all that pacing." The church was simple inside, wooden pews and plain glass windows, but someone had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons that matched the flowers in Lydia's hair. The townspeople packed the pews, turning to watch as Lydia entered, and she saw curiosity and kindness in their faces, saw them taking in her dress and her nervous smile. But then she saw Colt standing at the front of the church, and everything else faded to nothing. He wore a dark suit she'd never seen before, his hair freshly cut and his face cleanly shaved, and he was staring at her like she'd hung the moon and stars. His expression held wonder and love and something that looked almost like reverence, and Lydia felt her fear dissolve under the warmth of that gaze. Henry offered her his arm. "May I have the honor, miss?" "Please," Lydia whispered, and let him guide her down the aisle toward the man who'd become her whole future. The ceremony itself was brief. The circuit preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, about choosing to love through storms and sunshine both. He asked if Colt would take Lydia as his wife, to honor and cherish, to stand beside through whatever life brought them. Colt's "I will" came out strong and sure, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face. Then the preacher turned to her. "And do you, Lydia Marsh, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and cherish, to stand beside through whatever life brings you?" Lydia thought about the long journey that had brought her here, thought about her father's laughter and Ruby's betrayal and all the years of being told she wasn't good enough, thought about stepping off that wagon expecting rejection and finding something else entirely, thought about blisters and storms and a wild stallion who'd learned to trust, thought about Colt's hands on her face telling her she was strong, his kiss on the porch promising her a home, his voice yesterday declaring his love in front of the whole town. "I will," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Colt slid a simple gold band onto her finger, and Lydia did the same for him, their hands trembling slightly as they touched. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife,
and then Colt was pulling her close, kissing her in front of everyone, claiming her as his in a way that left no room for doubt. The church erupted in cheers and applause. Henry whooped loud enough to make the rafters shake. Jake whistled, and Lydia Brennan, Mrs. Colt Brennan, kissed her husband back and felt joy burst through her like sunlight breaking clouds. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the yard transformed with tables laden with food the neighboring ranchers had brought. There was music and dancing and so much laughter that Lydia's cheeks hurt from smiling. The town women who'd made her dress came to embrace her, welcoming her officially into their community. The ranch hands traded stories about Colt's nervous pacing that morning and Lydia's first disastrous encounters with the mean chickens. But it was Mrs. Crawford, the general store owner's wife, who pulled Lydia aside as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s, with gray threading through her brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "I wanted to tell you something, dear," she said, taking Lydia's hands in hers. "We all heard about what happened with your sister yesterday, heard what she said to you, and heard what you said right back. And I want you to know, we're proud of you. Proud of how you handled yourself, proud of how you've worked this ranch, proud to have you as one of us now." Lydia's throat went tight. "That's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's truth." Mrs. Crawford squeezed her hands. "This town has seen a lot of mail-order brides come and go over the years. Some work out, some don't. But you're different. You didn't just come here to marry a man. You came here and built a life, made yourself indispensable, showed us all that strength comes in forms we don't always recognize." She smiled. "Your sister may be beautiful, but beauty fades. Character lasts. And you, my dear, have more character in your little finger than that girl has in her whole body." After Mrs. Crawford left, Lydia stood at the edge of the celebration, watching her new community laugh and dance and welcome her as one of their own. She spotted Colt across the yard talking to some neighboring ranchers, saw him glance her way and smile, saw him excuse himself and start walking toward her with clear purpose. "Having a good time, Mrs. Brennan?" he asked, pulling her into his arms right there in front of everyone. "The best time," Lydia said honestly. "I can't believe all these people came. Can't believe they're all so happy for us." "They're happy because they can see we're happy." Colt brushed a stray hair from her face. "And because word's gotten around about how you handled Ruby yesterday. Apparently standing up to cruel people in the middle of Main Street wins you a lot of respect in this town." "I was terrified the whole time." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Lydia. It's doing what needs doing despite the fear, and you were brave." He kissed her softly. "I'm so damn proud of you." As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, the celebration began to wind down. The neighboring ranchers loaded their families into wagons, calling out final congratulations. The ranch hands retreated to the bunkhouse with leftover pie and whiskey, giving Colt and Lydia their privacy. Henry was the last to say goodnight, hugging Lydia hard enough to lift her feet off the ground. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Brennan," he said gruffly. "Been waiting a long time to say that." Then it was just the two of them standing in the yard as full dark settled over the ranch, stars beginning to emerge overhead. Colt's arm was around Lydia's waist, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the certainty of his presence. "You ready to go inside?" he asked quietly. "It's been a long day." Lydia heard the question beneath the question, heard him asking if she was ready for everything that came next. They were married now, truly married, and the night stretched ahead of them full of possibilities and promises. Her heart raced with nervousness and anticipation in equal measure. "I'm ready," she said, "as long as you are." Colt swept her up into his arms without warning, making her gasp and laugh. "Been ready since the moment I realized I loved you," he said, carrying her toward the house. "Been ready since you stood in that storm with me, and I understood what it meant to have a true partner. Been ready since you watched me gentle thunder and realized I was good for something besides disappointment," Lydia teased. "Since I watched you gentle thunder and realized you were good at everything," Colt corrected, shouldering open the front door. "Including making stubborn ranchers fall in love with you." He carried her up the stairs, not to her small room at the end of the hall, but to the master bedroom she'd never entered. His bedroom, their bedroom now. He set her down carefully just inside the doorway, and Lydia took in the space with wide eyes. It was simple like everything else in the house, but someone had been here recently. Fresh flowers sat on the dresser. The bed was made with new linens, and candles burned on the nightstands, casting everything in warm, golden light. "Henry," Colt said, following her gaze. "He's a romantic at heart, though he'd deny it if you asked." Lydia turned to face her husband, this man who'd been so angry when she'd first arrived, who'd given her the hardest jobs expecting her to fail, who'd slowly learned to see her and then chosen to love her. "Colt, I'm nervous," she admitted. I don't know how to." "Neither do I," he said, and she heard the honesty in it. "Not really. Not with someone who matters this much. But we'll figure it out together, same way we figured out everything else." "And Lydia?" He cupped her face in his hands. "There's no rush. No expectations. Tonight is just about us being together, in whatever way feels right. Okay?" She nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes at his gentleness. "Okay." They took their time learning each other, Colt patient and careful, Lydia shy but willing. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Two people who'd survived their own storms finding shelter in each other. Two people who'd been broken learning to be whole together. Afterward, lying in Colt's arms with her head on his chest, Lydia felt more at peace than she'd ever felt in her life. This was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from storms, but someone to stand in them with you. "What are you thinking?" Colt asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm glad my father sent me instead of Ruby," Lydia said. "That I'm glad you were angry and difficult and made me work for every scrap of acceptance. That I'm glad for all of it, because it led us here." Colt's arms tightened around her. "I used to think being alone made me strong. Thought needing someone was weakness. But Lydia, having you here, building this life with you, it doesn't make me weaker. It makes me stronger, makes me braver, makes me want to be better." "You're already good," Lydia whispered. "You're already everything I need." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Lydia's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd finally found where she belonged. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm, one that felt both familiar and completely transformed. Lydia still woke before dawn, still fed the mean chickens and worked with Thunder, still helped with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. But now she did it as Colt's wife, as the lady of the house, as someone who had every right to be there. The changes were small but significant. Colt's office became their office, his ledgers now managed by Lydia's capable hands while he focused on the land. The bare sitting room slowly transformed as Lydia added small touches, curtains she'd sewn herself, wildflowers in vases, books she'd ordered from the catalog. The master bedroom lost its Spartan emptiness and became a space that felt like both of them, not just him. But the biggest change was in Colt himself. The hard edges Lydia had first encountered softened day by day. He smiled more, laughed easier, touched her freely whenever they were in the same room. The ranch hands teased him mercilessly about being soft, but he just grinned and pulled Lydia closer, not caring who saw. "Man's allowed to be soft about his wife," he'd say. "Doesn't make me less capable with cattle." 2 months after the wedding, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Lydia recognized her father's handwriting and nearly threw it in the fire unopened, but Colt stopped her, his hand gentle on her wrist. "You should read it," he said, "not for his sake, but for yours, so you know for certain what you left behind, what you escaped." With trembling hands, Lydia opened the letter. Her father's words were exactly what she'd expected. Shock and outrage that she'd actually married that rancher. Demands that she come to her senses and return home immediately. Insistence that she was making the biggest mistake of her life by staying in that God-forsaken wilderness with a man who'd clearly taken advantage of her desperation. There was no apology for sending her west as a joke. No acknowledgement that he'd hurt her. No recognition that she might actually be happy. Just the same old judgment and control he'd wielded her whole life, dressed up as concern. Lydia read it twice, then calmly folded it and dropped it into the fireplace. She watched the paper catch and burn, watched her father's words turn to ash, and felt something release in her chest. "You okay?" Colt asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I'm perfect," Lydia said, and meant it. "He wants me to come home, to admit I made a mistake. He can't imagine that I'm actually happy here, that I chose this life and you over anything he could offer me." "Are you?"
Happy here? Lydia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her whole world. Happier than I knew it was possible to be. Happier than I deserve. You deserve everything, Colt said fiercely. Every good thing this world has to offer, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it. She kissed him then, deep and long, tasting the promise of forever in it. Outside, thunder whinnied from his paddock, probably demanding attention. The chickens would need feeding soon. Henry would be looking for help with the new fence line they were building. The work was endless, the days were hard, and the Montana winters promised to be brutal. But Lydia had never been happier in her life. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and gold, and Lydia thought about how far she'd come. 3 months ago, she'd stepped off a wagon expecting to be sent home, expecting to be the punchline of her father's cruelest joke. Now she sat here as Mrs. Colt Brennan, lady of a thriving ranch, wife to a man who loved her, and finally, someone who knew her own worth. I wrote back to my father, she said suddenly. In my head, anyway. Want to hear what I said? Always, Colt said, pulling her closer against his side. I told him thank you. Lydia smiled at Colt's surprised expression. Thank you for sending me west as a joke, because that joke became the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for being cruel, because your cruelty taught me what real kindness looks like when I finally found it. Thank you for making me believe I wasn't good enough, because overcoming that belief made me stronger than I ever would have been otherwise. You actually going to send that? No, he doesn't deserve the closure. Lydia settled deeper into Colt's embrace. But I needed to say it, even if just to you. Needed to acknowledge that his worst impulses ended up being my greatest blessing. Colt was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if Ruby had shown up instead of you? If she'd been the one to step off that wagon, the one I'd been expecting? You would have married her, Lydia said, trying to keep her voice light, even though the thought still stung. Would have had the pretty wife you wanted. Maybe. Or maybe I would have realized within a week that beauty without substance is just a pretty shell with nothing inside. Maybe I would have spent the rest of my life wondering why my perfect bride felt so empty, why the house still felt lonely, even with her in it. He turned to look at Lydia directly. Your father thought he was playing a joke when he sent you instead of Ruby. But the real joke would have been on me if I'd gotten what I thought I wanted. Because what I wanted was wrong, Lydia. What I needed was you. You can't know that. I can. Colt's voice was certain. Because I've lived with you now. I've seen what it's like to have a real partner, someone who works beside me instead of just decorating my house, someone who stands in storms and gentles wild horses and makes me laugh, someone who sees me, really sees me, and chooses to stay anyway. That's not something Ruby could ever give me, no matter how beautiful she is. That's something only you could do. Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came from finally believing you were wanted. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Then be scared with me, Colt said, repeating the words that had become their promise. Be scared and happy and alive with me. Build this ranch with me. Grow old with me. Be mine, and let me be yours for as long as we both shall live. Forever, Lydia said. I'll be yours forever. They sat like that as darkness fell and stars emerged, two people who'd found each other in the least likely way possible and built something real from the ashes of disappointed expectations. Around them, the ranch settled into night, horses nickering in the barn, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the endless prairie stretching away in all directions. 3 months ago, Lydia Marsh had arrived at this ranch as a joke, as the wrong sister, as the woman nobody wanted. Now she sat here as Lydia Brennan, as the right woman, as someone who'd been chosen and cherished and loved beyond measure. The gossips in town still whispered about it sometimes, about the big rancher who'd passed over the beautiful sister and chosen the plain one, about the mail-order bride who'd arrived as a substitute and become the real thing. They said it with wonder, with confusion, with the kind of curiosity that came from witnessing something they didn't quite understand. But those who knew Colt and Lydia, who'd watched them work side by side and seen the way they looked at each other, understood perfectly.
They'd seen what happened when two people who'd been broken by the world found each other and built something whole. They'd witnessed the kind of love that grew not from first impressions, but from shared storms and steady commitment, and the daily choice to see the best in each other. And in the years that followed, as Lydia and Colt built their life together, as Thunder became the finest horse in 3 counties, as the ranch prospered and grew, as children eventually arrived to fill the house with laughter, the story of how they came together became legend in that small Montana town. It was the story of a cruel joke that became a great love. The story of a woman who'd been told she was worthless, discovering she was priceless. The story of a man who'd thought he knew what he wanted, learning what he needed. The story of 2 broken people finding each other and becoming whole. But for Lydia and Colt, it was simply their story. The story of how they'd stood in storms together and chosen each other day after day, year after year, for the rest of their lives. And they lived happily ever after. Not because life was easy, not because they never faced hardship, but because they faced everything together. Because they'd learned that real love isn't about perfection or beauty or getting the expected package. Real love is about seeing someone completely, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway. About building something permanent from the temporary disappointments life throws your way. About standing in storms and knowing you're not alone. On her deathbed many years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and a husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon, Lydia Marsh Brennan would think back to that day she'd stepped off a wagon in Montana expecting rejection. She'd think about her father's laughter and Ruby's betrayal and her own certainty that she'd never be good enough. And she'd smile, because all of that pain, all of that cruelty, all of those years of being the wrong daughter had led her exactly where she needed to be. To this ranch, to this man, to this life she'd built from nothing but stubborn determination and the refusal to give up. Her father had sent her west as a joke, thinking he was discarding something worthless. But he'd actually given her the greatest gift anyone could give, the chance to discover her own strength, to find real love, to become exactly who she was meant to be. And that, Lydia thought, as Colt's hand squeezed hers one final time, was the best joke of all. Because the daughter her father had thrown away had become the woman everyone wanted. And the cruel prank he'd played had become the greatest love story the Montana Territory had ever known. In the end, Lydia Marsh had been the perfect bride after all. Not for the life her father had planned, not for the shallow existence Ruby would have lived, but for this wild, beautiful, storm-swept life she'd built with Colt Brennan. She'd been the perfect bride for the man who needed her, the perfect wife for the life that had been waiting for her all along. And she'd lived every single day of it, knowing she was chosen, knowing she was loved, knowing she was exactly enough. The cruel joke had become the perfect truth, and Lydia Brennan spent the rest of her life grateful for every moment of it.